Hello, everyone. I gotta tweet this out. So you can see on the right side, puzzle games are one of my favorite genres, and I've played quite a lot of them. You guys can't quite see it because it's a little bit cut off, but maybe if I do this, no, you can still can't see it. But there's a list of puzzle games here, and it starts all the way here, 2048, and it goes down from like 606 all the way down to 764. So it's about 160 different puzzle games I've played in my lifetime, and they're all very different. And they're all very cool. And The Witness is just one more. Lower that volume. One more puzzle game in a long list of interesting puzzle games that I've played. So I don't know. I think a lot of people see The Witness and they see that it's in 3D. They see that it's a somewhat open world, so they try to think about it in terms that are probably more familiar to them, like shooters or adventure games. But really, it probably does us a lot better to just start off considering how much The Witness is similar to existing puzzle games. And there's a lot of different kinds out there. I mean, indies have been doing puzzle games online for quite a while, browser-based, a lot of puzzle platformers, but really there's a lot of different types. Yeah. So I think something interesting that Jonathan Blow has been he's been saying in many interviews for the past 4 years when he talks about The Witness. Here, I'll show you on the DL website what I'm talking about. So on designoriented.net, you can pretty much find anything you want with regards to game design and game-oriented topics. So if I type in Blow for author source right here and hit enter, it'll spin for a bit. So we get everything in our entire database that, you know, ignoring the stuff on the right side for now, everything in the entire database that either has Jonathan Blow in the title or Jonathan Blow as one of the authors. It's an interview, so he gets put in as the author. So he's talking about, let's look at the timeline. Oh my goodness. So Jonathan Blow's he was on the experimental gameplay panel in 2005 GDC. The game developers rant. Interesting. Indie prototyping Braid and making innovative games. 2007, 2008. Independent Game Summit. Then Jonathan Blow, The Path to Braid. You know Braid came out in 2008. I think that's about right. So like, even though Jonathan Blow has been saying things before Braid, here's where things start to get crazy and people start to talk to Jonathan more, and he gets to talk a lot more about how he designs games and what he thinks, so people pay attention. You know, podcasts, here he is, experimental gameplay sessions, implementing rewind system in Braid, talking about design reboots, truth in game design, all this stuff. So he says a lot of stuff about games. And one of the, I've probably read and looked at 80% of these, maybe 50, but he talks about this idea that what's special about puzzle games is, you know, the aha moment that you have and how to, you know, make that be the highlight of the game's design, how to make that come out in the player's experience, and how to make sure you don't get in the way as a designer. He usually contrasts that with examples of adventure games. So earlier in the day we had a stream and we listened to the do's and don'ts of honest puzzle game design. And in that talk, I think Matthew, he mentioned that he had listened to some of Jonathan Blow's stuff, and he was really sort of riffing off a lot of the ideas Jonathan Blow put out there. So there was a lot of echoing similar sentiments between the two. Jonathan Blow has this idea that he has a range of ideas he expresses, but one is like, let's not make games like adventure games. Let's make games that have this aha moment and have the answer right in front of your face, and the reason you don't see it is because you didn't conceptualize it in your head properly, rather than you didn't click the right pixel, you didn't do the appropriate random sequence or stand in the right random place to have something trigger, which is generally what puzzle game designers and people like about good games, not being tricked and not having to be frustrated, hunting for things that they have seemingly no clue or no way of knowing about. But I think it's strange that that whole conversation came about because people were contrasting it with adventure games, and adventure games are really old. There's a reason they stopped becoming popular, or a lot of what people liked about adventure games has been adapted to other genres. We have action adventure now, and the RPG genre itself is, highly varied from turn-based, more JRPG type experiences to now open world, 3D, real time, all these different kinds of variants. So the part about the classic adventure games that has not survived, that's not translated well or been adapted, is sort of the quest, the obscure puzzles that send players off on these crazy quests and have them connect all these different details and be in the right place at the right time and observe things far too closely than perhaps the game had trained them to do so. But now we have this whole discourse that's sort of obsessed about the ideas that Jonathan Blow is putting out there, and just kind of taking a lot of his ideas wholesale without really understanding the perspective from which Jonathan Blow was originally speaking, or how to apply it accurately to games that currently exist. Cool. So yeah, this whole week is dedicated to better understanding puzzle games and The Witness, trying to say something really profound about The Witness, because besides everything Jonathan Blow said here, like as you can see, let's run some stats on that real quick before we tab off of it. Yeah, so like in general chat, we're talking about puzzle games tonight. So if you have a puzzle game you want to talk about, feel free to post it in the chat. We'll talk about it. Hopefully I played a lot of puzzle games. If you want to see all the games I've played, here's a link. Maybe that's the edit link. I needed the shareable link. This one. Copy. How about that one? Beep. So yeah, Jonathan Blow alone, if you wanted to read everything that he had to say, it's about 21,000 words worth of stuff across 53 entries in our database, and that's not even counting the videos. He has a lot of video interviews and podcasts, so like Jonathan Blow said a lot. But now if we want to just look at what is being said about The Witness, right? Hit enter, type in The Witness. Well, we've got a witness speed run right here, a witness map, some other things about The Witness. Hopefully there'll be more of that later. But let's look at the timeline. So, as you might expect, a lot of witness dots in the last 3 months than over the last 3 years, hopefully. You don't want too many people talking about a game before it comes out. As you can see, a lot of yellow dots. People were talking about the level design in The Witness. Level design, you can see it here, hovered over it. And run these stats. Oops, the crash mode music stopped. We need more of this. Why did it stop? Yeah, so 81,000 words written about The Witness, counting videos at this point. But on the chat, Monty Kenton is asked the question, what is a level in The Witness? And level typically we call something that's a well, it's kind of arbitrary, right? Some Monty can't say. Okay. It's kind of arbitrary. Sometimes the developers really help us out by marking levels like, hey, this is level 3, and then we just take whatever they give us. In the Witness case, the whole island's open, it's kind of open world. We understand that there are themes to areas, so we obviously know there are areas demarked by lasers, and you have to solve, X many puzzles in that area to unlock the laser. So we understand those are areas. I say an individual level is as small as a puzzle, like a single panel puzzle. Because if you were playing, let's say, Tetris Attack or any of those other more classic puzzle games, you would complete each screen, and that's the level. And then when you complete it, you move on. So it's kind of like, okay, each challenge is self-contained inside of a panel in the Witness, in the same way that the challenge was contained inside of the screen in some of those other games. So I consider that to be a level. Even if there's larger levels, it doesn't even matter. Like, as long as you're pretty clear about what you're saying. But yeah, a lot of people talking about the Witness. So in the Witness we have how many? I still don't know what the exact count is for how many puzzles are in the Witness, but it's somewhere around 600. And it's so confusing. I wish I just had a straight number, because sometimes people count the perspective puzzles, the environmental puzzles, and sometimes they count the panels separately, and the game counts them separately. So like, they'll give you two numbers for how many you completed. I just don't know which number is which. But yeah, so like John Blow talking about his game and sort of like marketing it and hyping it up for like the last 4 or 6 years, has said a lot of the same things over and over. If you listen to some of his interviews, he expresses this idea, and he's gotten really good at just sort of delivering it in a very succinct nugget of truth, if you will. And sometimes I feel like much of it is an exaggeration. Like sometimes you have to differentiate your game when you're talking to other people so they can get it right, because there's so much noise out there. But sometimes I feel like there's a little bit of hyperbole in how he talks about what his puzzle game aims to do compared to other games, right? Oftentimes, in the way people write about The Witness, they compare it to other games, like shooters do this, and other games are filled with all these extra things, like RPGs and other action games. They have all these extra modes and extra guns and extra this and that. But The Witness is all about minimalism, and you're like, well, obviously it's a puzzle game. The Witness has always been a puzzle game, so it would be much more accurate to compare it to a puzzle game. And I feel like because a lot of people don't play puzzle games, they never really had the language to talk about puzzle games before, that they are mostly unequipped to talk about The Witness. So instead of sort of bringing any sort of diverse viewpoints or experiences to the table, I think most of them, in one way or another, repeat what Jonathan Blow said about his own game. So what we're doing here is we're trying to get to the bottom of it, right? We're trying to just understand, okay, well, what can we find out about The Witness? What can be said about it? Just based on our own observations, without sort of taking too much in from what other people are saying. And this first day, this Monday, we're just talking about puzzle game design in general before we sort of tackle The Witness, because I feel like a lot of these, the foundation needs to be set. So like, if you have any questions in the chat, feel free to keep firing them off. One question I'm always curious about is what people consider to be a puzzle. Like Monty Canson, if you're still in the chat, Bleach EX, if you're still in the chat. Try answering what you consider to be a puzzle. Yeah. What do you think makes a puzzle a puzzle? I'll type it. Because we're talking about design right now, like in a broad sense, I'm going to change this color code to be black. There we go, now it's black. So Monty Kenson says a self-contained design problem with a specifically intended solution. Whose purpose is entertainment. Interesting. A self-contained design problem. Yeah, I think that's more or less how I feel like a lot of people describe what a puzzle is. Self-contained. I think self-contained mostly just means how would I put this? How about that? Music better? I can barely hear it. I can't tell what the stream sounds like. Yeah, I've heard other people say that a puzzle is a sort of a game, and I think a lot of people would share that part of the definition, because I feel like a lot of people think a puzzle is something with a single solution, right? And the goal is to find that single solution among many sort of non-solutions or red herrings, if you will. How about that? Music better? I can barely hear it. I can't tell what the stream sounds like. Yeah, I've heard other people say that a puzzle is a sort of a gameplay challenge with one and exactly one solution. Yeah, Tetris is a popular example for a puzzle game, but then a lot of people sort of take it back and they're like, well, I guess Tetris technically isn't a puzzle. So like, let's consider this then. I think there was an academic paper that came out, I guess, a long time ago, that proposed that a puzzle is a game that has a just one solution. Let me pull up that definition, because I like collecting definitions for this very purpose. And instead of making it up, might as well just read it. I don't have it. Oh well. But yeah, some people think a puzzle is just something with just one solution, even though we know now that a lot of puzzles have multiple solutions, right? Puzzle, I guess, would be a logic problem with a set of rules and a solid state. I guess it's... Yeah, so we watched a video earlier about how to design a logic puzzle, and clearly a logic puzzle is sort of a subset of what all puzzles are, so you can have a puzzle that isn't necessarily a logic puzzle. So let's take the classic jigsaw puzzle, right? And jigsaw puzzles are a type of puzzles that a lot of people make fun of because of, well, for various reasons, but I think you'll hear it in at that last talk, the do's and don'ts of puzzle game design. You mentioned something about jigsaw puzzles, and you'll hear a lot of people contrast jigsaw puzzles with puzzle games, right? They'll say puzzle games are deep, but jigsaw puzzles are shallow, right? So, a jigsaw puzzle is just essentially a large picture that they break up into a bunch of weird shapes. They don't have to be the classic sort of jigsaw shape, but you know, anything close, anything splintered up into tiny pieces works, right? I'm gonna put a new topic. Jigsaw puzzle. So yeah. And the reason people consider it to be a puzzle is because, you know, it's a challenge that doesn't really stress any other kinds of skills, like any physical dexterity, any timing skills, any reflex, or anything like that. All it is testing your observation skills and, in a lot of ways, your patience. You know, sticking it out to the end. A lot of people consider jigsaw puzzles to be relatively shallow because essentially it's the same simple rote exercise, the same low a low level task that you do over and over. You just hold up two pieces, you're like, do they fit? No. I mean, do they fit? No. And essentially you can solve the whole jigsaw puzzle if you just do that enough times with enough pieces, and then eventually there'll be fewer and fewer pieces to compare and you'll solve it. That seems to be sort of this skill floor way of solving a jigsaw puzzle, and I think a lot of people agree that there's not much more to it than that. I'm a little doubtful that jigsaw puzzles are as shallow as people say, but let's contrast that with what people consider to be deep puzzles, right? And deep puzzles are ones where there's a set of rules, whether or not those rules are, you know, in a board game type thing, a word puzzle, or it's a video game where you have your rules encoded into the game. But it's a consistent set of rules, and they create these challenges for you, and essentially there's only a few ways or one way to solve it, and you're supposed to use your brain to get through it, right? And these puzzles are difficult because you have to use higher level reasoning in order to solve them in any reasonable time or any reasonable way. So while you can brute force anything, theoretically, the only people that are actually going to make progress and have fun doing it are the people who think about each individual rule, each individual detail, consider its implications, make a model in their head, look turns ahead, consider combinations, and as many combinations as there can be, and use all of that sort of higher level thinking and analysis in order to reverse engineer a solution based on what they know and what the confines of the challenge are. So, like, okay, cool, you're smart. But then you could say that you could pretty much build a puzzle out of anything, and I think a lot of games have proved this already. You take a strategy game, and instead of allowing players to build a bunch of units, instead of allowing players to have a lot of freedom with the choices they make, you give them just a very narrow band of choices, and you say, like, which choice is the best, or which sequence 5 steps removed from this first step will get you, to the goal, right? And oftentimes by taking more open-ended gameplay systems and building a level via level design, right? I'll change the color to this level design. Building a level out. Next. Level design, there we go. You can essentially shrink the game down to where it only has one or very narrow band of solutions, and a lot of people consider that to be a puzzle, right? It's because of the same thing how we described before. It's like, okay, you seem to have all these possibilities, but most of them are bad, and then you have to use your brain in order to sort of inject the system inside your head, work on it a few times in a few ways, and then that'll bring you much closer to solving it than just blind trial and error, guessing, checking, or brute forcing. And again, that's kind of what all games do in a certain way. The harder the challenge essentially means the less and less general things you have to do to be successful, the less random things you can do to be successful, the less likely there is that any option you choose is the correct option. Therefore, you have to leverage your knowledge and your other skills in order to get closer and closer to the very few options that are actually going to win. And that's kind of the pattern that we see with just about every interactive system and every game on the planet. So like, this is why a lot of people have a really hard time sort of pinning down what a puzzle is, right? This is not to mention the fact that when you play just about any game on a high level, just about any game competitively, it requires a lot of knowledge. You have to know the system inside and out. You got to know your controls inside and out. You got to know all the obstacles, all the enemies, all the timings, all the patterns, as much as possible. And the more you know that stuff, the better you can play. So people often conflate this idea that, oh, because there's stuff to learn, it's a puzzle, right? And because it's getting hard in a few things, there's fewer and fewer ways to win, it's a puzzle. You're like, well, not necessarily, right? But we're dealing with the same kind of thing. Skills are being stressed in a very similar way when you are requiring more and more knowledge of the player. Which means the more and more they have to think ahead and leverage the knowledge in order to be successful. And for most game systems, that knowledge is of roles that interact with each other. So we're really quickly getting to a place where comparing normal gameplay systems with puzzle systems has this like really blurred line. So I like to just step back from that a little bit and just say, hey, puzzle games, unlike real-time games, unlike many other games, stress your knowledge skills, right? And not just your knowledge of memorizing, enemy patterns, memorizing the level. That you can chalk up to long-term memory. I wish I could show you a really cool diagram of this. I don't even know if I have one. Let's see if I can find one in like 2 seconds, right? I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna type in. Okay. Yeah. Oh, this thing's not supposed to be moving. So gotta go back to level. There we go, this color. Pause. So, actually I can type in keywords. So, yeah, you look at your skills, you look at the skill spectrum, you're like, okay, well, if there's 5 major types of skill, and real-time gameplay essentially stresses reflex timing and dexterity for the most part. And whenever you enter a turn-based situation, you're mostly entirely focused on your knowledge skills. Then we can get a lot closer to figuring out how puzzle games work, right? It's not just memorizing things, that's your long-term memory, and it's not just quickly thinking about things and making a choice among a few options. That's mostly your short-term memory. It's about leveraging your analysis skills, which is why people nowadays generally consider puzzles that stress deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, um, and abductive reasoning, reasoning skills as being sort of the mark of puzzle gameplay, right? And even though a lot of games to various degrees stress this, it's only a few. I mean, puzzle games really focus on it like exclusively. So, like, even though that's a fine line to draw, oh yeah, abductive, sure. So there's a cool video we watched earlier today. Yeah, there's a cool video we watched earlier today called what's it called? Logic. How to design a logic puzzle. So I type in abductive here, and right here, how to build a logic puzzle. And the three types of reasoning that he focused on most was inductive, abductive, and deductive. And I have them defined nicely. Where are they? But essentially, deductive reasoning is like, okay, you start with information and then you work your way to the solution based on what you have. And I think inductive reasoning is the opposite, where you have a hole in what your starting conditions are, but you know you want to go, so you kind of reason your way to that point. You're like, okay, well, I need to do this, but if it's going to be on fire, then it's got to do this. And then abductive was the new one I learned. And definition is a form of logical inference which goes from an observation to a theory, which accounts for the observation, ideally seeking to find the simplest and most likely explanation, right? So, observation first, then a theory, and you're trying to use that theory to explain what you observed. But essentially just trying to build a model or a story based on what you observe in order to fit what you're looking at and account for all the cases based on what you observe. Deductive reasoning is a conclusion based on and concordance with multiple premises that are generally assumed to be true. So deductive reasoning, you start with a handful of things like, okay, I know this is true, this is true, this is true, therefore this conclusion that I can draw has to be true because I'm kind of drawing it from things that are already known. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to just sort of better describe the different kinds of reasoning that you can use to solve a puzzle, but essentially logic puzzles are what we're talking about here. So this means that just because something has one solution, just because something is linear, just because something is hard, just because something requires you to think, just because something requires you to memorize something, just because a challenge forced you to leverage a piece of knowledge that you had to learn, none of that means it's a puzzle. So far, like a much better definition of puzzle is really looking at how well it sort of stresses and preserves these kinds of mental exercises you have to do, these various types of reasoning you have to apply in order to solve a challenge without stressing other types of skill. Right? It's all about what goes on in your head. It's all about how things are stressed in your mind. And, the more you play puzzle games, you can really feel the difference. You can really feel that the way you have to think about it and the way you can think about it in order to do increasingly better and better at these puzzle games stresses things that you just don't normally stress or need to stress in other games. And even though you're using your brain and your fingers across all these video games, these experiences are very different. It's why there are puzzle fans like me. It's why there's so few gamers and players out there that really like puzzle games, and it's why it appeals to a certain personality type, which appeals to a certain learner type, which is distinct enough for us to have its own genre, and therefore, ta-da, puzzle game. Yeah, so consider Tetris. Everybody knows Tetris. Everybody knows what it looks like, how it works. And some people consider Tetris not to be as much of a puzzle game as other games because it's in real time. It's like stress. Oh, the game moves in real time, therefore, X, Y, Z. But really, what is that? I'm pretty sure you typed that earlier, but it's funny when I say everybody knows Tetris and you say what is that in the chat. Here are the results for Tetris. People have been talking about Tetris forever. At least it pops up in all these different conversations. No, but it's crazy. So, like, if you really think about it, you're like, okay, I'm gonna create a challenge and it's gonna stress all these types of reasoning. It's gonna require you to think and understand the rules and build a whole in your head, piece everything together, and then it's gonna require you to like answer X, Y, Z. Let's call that a puzzle. You made a puzzle. So now, if you present someone with that puzzle and then you give them a 5-minute time limit, that time pressure may freak some people out. It may cause people that would otherwise solve the puzzle to completely like lose their focus and stress out. Adding any element has a chance to greatly and seriously affect the performance of people. That's just kind of how people are and what life is. But if you really consider what's happening, that 5-minute timer doesn't really change the nature of the challenge. Because whether or not they get it in 5 minutes and need more, or they don't need more time, or whether they do need more time, their process in tackling that problem should still be very much in line with how a puzzle game should be solved. Thinking about the rules, taking a careful assessment of the details and the particulars of the challenge, and then using various levels of reasoning to get the job done right. So in a way, that time pressure doesn't really change the core experience of solving that puzzle. You just have less time to get it done before the game cuts you off or whatever. In a lot of ways, the reason why Tetris is still a puzzle game, the reason why it's such a good one too, is because at the very core of Tetris, your ability to place blocks well and to survive in the game is directly related to your ability to understand the core relationship between the core sort of dynamic of the tetraminos, how they fit together in all sorts of orientations, combinations, and have that model in your head so sharp that no matter if they throw random pieces at you or never give you a long piece for whatever reason, that as you're playing, you have like this like perfect understanding of the potential of your moves and the consequences, and you make all these informed decisions about like, if I put this here, I have X amount of moves to correct this mistake, and I need Y pieces in order to do so if I don't get this. So like, you just have the entire model like in your head, and your ability to play better is directly reflected in it directly reflects your understanding of how Tetris works. So really, it all is stressing your understanding of how you build up formations of Tetris and tear them down, and that is so elegantly done because all the pieces in Tetris are made out of 4. So you're essentially, working this core math problem over and over. And even though the Z piece or whatever kind of gets on your nerves, you can work around it. And there's all these other sorts of interesting ways that the feedback of Tetris whenever you make a mistake kind of shows you how bad you are by where you left holes and how hard it is to correct your mistakes. So like, yes, it's in real time. Yes, the game goes faster and faster. Yes, eventually you'll be crushed, or nearly everyone who plays Tetris will be crushed, and they cannot survive on the Grandmaster level where it's going so fast and the pieces are invisible. So what? But you're still playing a very rich and deep puzzle experience, no matter when the game's moving slowly or fast, right? So it's pretty easy to consider and understand how Tetris works in that way, and how it's and what part of your skill set it's stressing. and not to get hung up on details like, oh, the game speeds up, or you gotta have fast reflexes in Texas. Like reflexes, like if you really have the model in your head and you really understand what's happening in the game, then you should be anticipating the pieces. You should be looking so far ahead and however many pieces it gives you of a heads up on the side that it's not even about reflex. It's just about running the engine that you put inside your head, right? And making that engine run as smoothly as possible to spit out quality responses, right? Yeah. So Tetris is cool. Certainly there's more traditional games that puzzle games that aren't in don't have any real-time elements at all. Decoding. You want me to talk about that, or is that just a random question? These are all the results that I've written about the word puzzle and me. These are all the results. I did a huge thing on Starseed Pilgrim, just really detailing with some friends all the different ways that the game works and doesn't work, and how a lot of the real-time elements and the platforming elements of the game kind of distract people into thinking that it's one way, but really all it is testing your understanding of how the seeds work. It's a puzzle platformer if you've never heard of it. Let me see if I can pull that up. Games. See. Oh yeah. Yeah. So like when you play any game, understanding its system, it's basically like, hey, you have to understand how it works. Take that model and put it inside your head in order to play better. And then puzzle games, and one way to think about puzzle games is, like you're saying, they're like a language written out in their own rules, in their own system. And what you do is learn the language, the rules, and then you can sort of read it. You start interpreting things based on how they work, and how they work may be all kinds of strange rules and interactions, but you get used to it, and all of a sudden you're sort of thinking within the game's terms, within the game's world, instead of just as a weird observer. So yes, there's some entries in here for Starseed Pilgrim. All these different seed colors and seed types and level elements and so on and so forth. Yeah, but I did one on reading puzzle games, right? So I wrote these articles a long time ago on my blog, like 6 years ago. Jeez. And it's 2 articles. This one I wrote first. It's puzzle design and decoder reading, and just really understanding how puzzle games worked, right? This is kind of like the way puzzles are designed that Jonathan Blow doesn't like, or doesn't specialize in. But one way you can think of a puzzle is taking a system, which is a collection of rules, and taking the challenge and then just sort of taking a solution and then encoding it, right? So let's say that the challenge is to walk from one opening of a room to the other, but there are these spots that sort of like teleport you back to the beginning of the room. You're like, well, how do I know where the spots are? We're like, well, check this out. We threw a whole bunch of arrows into the room. You're like, okay, I'll just follow the arrows. Like, in this room, the arrows are every third arrow that you take is actually the opposite direction that you need to take. So, like, essentially, what they did was they created a challenge. You know, you know what you need to do to get through that challenge, but they put on this extra layer of coding, and you're like, okay, well, as long as I take that rule, keep it in mind, and interpret all of my actions according to that rule, I can just apply it and get through. And a lot of puzzle games are like that, including Pokemon Picross, Picross 3D. I think, well, to some degree, crossword puzzles and a few other types of puzzles, right? So you have this thing, you have this like layout, and they give you the answer essentially by putting numbers all around the outside. And then what you do is you sit there. Let's get a picture of Picross. What you do is you sit there, you look at the numbers, and then you figure out where to go from there. And that sounds like cheating, but it's actually how the game works. And it's really interesting because check out this super huge screenshot I just nabbed off online. If you've never seen Picross, all these squares are not filled in with X's or black dots. So essentially, you have to figure out where to put all these things based on how these numbers are written on the outside. And you never have to make a guess in Picross. Slowly but surely, you can chip away at the answer and use blocks that you've already filled in to eliminate possibilities on the other axis, right? You can slowly chip away until you get near the end and it gets faster and faster, and then you fill out a picture and you're like, oh look, it's a Keldeo. In Pokemon Picross's case, but puzzle games do this, right? This is not really about a systemic set of roles. This is not really about emergence. These type of puzzle games aren't about surprising possibilities. This isn't about hiding secrets anywhere. These are just really straight up, pretty straightforward. It's what you see is what you get. And another puzzle game that's like this is Sudoku, the classic Sudoku, right? So now in general we have. Let me put a note of this. Jigsaw versus Sudoku versus Braid. Spell it right. So this is essentially what we're talking about. We're looking at these different types of puzzle games. We're saying what kind of, well, do they qualify as puzzle games? One, yeah, okay. How do they stress your mind? Okay. What skills do they stress? Knowledge, okay, they stress your mind. How do they stress your mind? They make you, they are much easier to solve and much more enjoyable to solve when you leverage different types of reasoning above all else. Sudoku holds the secret to the universe. I agree. I'm going to pop up a Sudoku image too. So we can kind of see, this looks like a good one. I want a bigger one. Check that out. Oh. Okay, so we can kind of see here that we have an interesting spectrum of different examples to look at. Between a jigsaw puzzle, which we all understand to have like a lot of different pieces, and they basically take their coding system and they make you look at each individual piece as each piece holds a small but necessary piece of information in order to figure out the whole. But when you look at that piece, you cannot necessarily deduce. It's why we consider this to be a shallow puzzle. You can't deduce anything significant about any other piece, almost any other piece, in any significant way to kind of cut through the monotony of playing a jigsaw puzzle. That's the basic idea. Then we have something in the middle like Sudoku here, where Sudoku or Picross, Picross looks prettier, where you are given a very simple system and everything is deductively solvable, so you don't have to ever make a guess in this game. But based on the clues they give you, you can always work out at least one more piece of information, which always lets you work out with a high degree of certainty, like 100%, or near 100% for some of the harder Sudoku puzzles, what the next one is, and you just keep doing that, and then you solve it, right? So this is kind of what we have in the middle, and then the final stage. Get a screenshot. I'm gonna get a screenshot of the witness. Easy, I'll just slap this over here. And finally, we have the witness, right? These beautiful screenshots by Chris Wager. The witness, it's kind of like Braid, which is kind of like a lot of video game puzzle games. Essentially, you have a very relatively small set of rules. Compared to Sudoku and the jigsaw puzzles, these kinds of games have more rules than each other. So like these emergent systemic style deep reasoning puzzle games have more rules than the very elegant Sudoku, the less elegant Picross, but still pretty elegant, and the jigsaw puzzle, which you can consider to be the most elegant because you can play a completely blank jigsaw puzzle where all the pieces are just blank white or a solid color, and you can still play the jigsaw. You just work it one piece at a time, and good luck. That's not for me. But you can see that the complexity sort of increases with all of these. Get out of here. Jonathan Blow has been saying a lot recently that when he designs puzzle games, or what he considers to be a good puzzle game, is one where, as a designer, you come up with a few rules, right? You put them in your system, but then at some point you just play around in your system and you explore the rules that you've already created, and you explore the possibility space, the design space, just kind of experiment and see what happens. And in doing so, you may stumble upon really interesting things that happen. And he's really big on this idea that you didn't intentionally design that, you just kind of discovered it. And he focuses on this idea that if you design games this way, you will discover challenges that you can build out of your puzzle engine into your gameplay. And these challenges tend to be much more quote unquote honest because because for a number of reasons they aren't so heavy-handedly intentionally designed, so they are less likely to have just sort of a bias or any kind of arbitrary slant that just like, oh, this is just how I think. Like, of course, all Kirby's are pink, and of course, like, I think this way. Of course, you turn right when you exit a room. Like, it'll have less and less of even these subtle, nearly harmless biases, and it'll just be more about how the rules work together and bubble up to reveal interesting things about how the rules work together, or just about the nature of the universe. If you Alright, I'll get back to that. But yeah, Jonathan Blow did a talk about how game design like this reveals the nature of the universe, and you're just like capturing a piece of how the rules and these sort of encoded parameters work, rather than explicitly designing a world, explicitly making it look like what you think it should look like in your head, explicitly encoding these relationships of rules to work in this specific way. And he says by doing this, your game will be more intuitive because you are working up from the rules that you create instead of having a vision and trying to make as many rules as possible adhere to that vision. He said that the puzzles will be more honest, they'll be more intuitive, like so on and so forth, which generally is correct. When you work from the system up, you'll have less of those weird sort of hang-ups where you'll put something in just because You make the system a priority first, and then you just kind of build around it. Many designers have expressed a similar idea of that in different ways, including Nintendo, where they find the fun first, and then they build the game around what the game can do. They make sure the controls work first, and then they see what is fun after that, instead of building the game and then just trying to get the controls to work so that the player can barely get through the set pieces and scenarios they build. This is just how design works, right? And whether or not you do it this way or not, or find some other way to do it, it's all beside the point. Uh, the deal is not, we don't really care about how to design games, we just care about how interesting games are after they're designed. But yeah, that's something that. So on the this third type of game, we're talking about Braid, we're talking about Pop Portal, we're talking about the Wit. There's a lot about how to engage with these games that are hardly expressed by critics and designers that I think only people who play a lot of these games can sort of really wrap their head around or really have a lot of direct experience with. But I've been playing a lot of Pokemon Picross, and I played Picross 3D, Pokemon Picross. I played Picross before in the old 2D version, and I'm playing Sudoku on my original Brain Age copy that I bought in like 2006, right? 10 years ago. Still working on those Sudoku puzzles. Uh, there's a lot about how to engage with these games that are hardly expressed by critics and designers that I think only people who play a lot of these games can sort of really wrap their head around or really have a lot of direct experience with. But I've been playing a lot of Pokemon Picross, and I played Picross 3D, Pokemon Picross. I played Picross before in the old 2D version, and I'm playing Sudoku on my original Brain Age copy that I bought in like 2006, right? 10 years ago. Still working on those Sudoku puzzles. But as I've gotten older and I go back, I get to apply all these new ways of thinking about these games that I didn't have before. So the question is, what inherent systems and rules that need to be in place for these puzzle games in order for the potential, uh, in order for there to have a lot of potential for you to solve them in with a lot of deep reasoning, whether or not that's optional, or whether or not that's something you can bring to it to solve it faster, or whether that's just something you can apply to it anyway, and it just kind of reveals another sort of layer to the experience. And I think a lot of people, I mean, this is just kind of true with the world, but they'll just take what the designer tells them, like what they think the designers are creating the game for. Like they're so obsessed with developer intent because in a lot of ways, it's kind of hard to go wrong with developer intent because I mean, they made the game. They know the most about it, especially when the game comes out. Um, and in general, with art and mediums of expression, trying to get across and or being receptive to and looking out for the messages that the creators are trying to get across is half the point, like almost all the point of experiencing it in the first place. So it's not a bad thing to sort of look for developer intent, but a lot of times I think right when you give people like a little nugget of that, they'll just run with it and they'll just use it as just like irrefutable this irrefutable view of the game. So like somebody tells you the game's deep and it's a developer, they're gonna run with it and they're gonna tell you all these things that they now understand about the game because they know it's deep, and regardless if they sort of investigate that or experience it for themselves. So we have this weird situation now with The Witness, where people are looking at they wanted the game to be deep. They wanted the game to be sort of Braid 2.0, like another indie hit. They wanted it to be really cool and unique and so on and so forth. And a lot of people looked at the game to harbor all these like really deep ideas and to have this really amazing experience. Part of the reason why is because Jonathan Blow kind of in the marketing position the game this way, but other reasons why just because that's what happens when you have a hit, then you release a sequel. It's kind of inevitable. But now we have a lot of people that said a lot of different things about The Witness, and I kind of want to straighten a lot of that out or just talk about it. And then, but in order to do that properly, we have to enter the discussion with all these different types of ways of understanding and analyzing puzzle games and games in general, right? So if it's a jigsaw puzzle, you look at complexity, you look at just how many pieces there are of this thing. You look, and by complexity, I mean like not only the types of pieces, but what kinds of low-level routine like loops are you entering in. Like jigsaw puzzle, you hold a piece to a piece, and then you compare it, and then you move on. So like, are you doing something like that over and over and over? Is that what's happening? As Sudoku, for those kinds of puzzle games, you look at the nature of the coding system, and then you can look at something that I want to talk about here. Like I wrote these 2 articles 6 years ago, puzzle design and decoder reading. I might just, let's see what was, oh no, it's Me by a Tree. When I was, how old was I, 23? Oh look, Tetris Attack. So, there's this idea that I came up with that I felt was really helpful to talk about puzzle games. And I was like, what's interesting about these games? They give you a puzzle that looks like this, right? Single screen, and you have to make X amount of moves, in this case, and clear all the color blocks. So like that's very typical for a lot of puzzle games, especially ones that are made out of game engines that are much more emergent and open. They say instead of being emergent and open and having all these different moves you can make and ways you can react, we want you to do X in as few moves as possible, or like in 2 moves only. And that really, like we were talking about earlier, clamps the challenge down and says, and now the challenge is much more linear. Now there's only one solution or maybe few solutions. And now in order to figure out what the solution is, you may have to think ahead. You can't just correct your mistakes and go, whatever, I'll just fix it like 4 more moves. You only get 2 moves. Like you can't do that. You have to really think about the interconnected relationship of these blocks and stuff. So like here in Tetris Attack, it's a great example of that. And then when I was playing it, I was like, you know what? In order to figure out which piece to pull, you have to look at the level, and you have to interpret what every single piece, like every single arrangement of the blocks in this case, means based on how you understand the game works. And in this case, and then I was like, that's like putting the entire game system, the rules there inside your head, and using that as your lens instead of just like a checklist, right? So I'm not just memorizing the rules of Tetris Attack. I am building that model in my head so I can look ahead without playing ahead, right? Instead of just trying out all the possibilities, I'll have it up here and I can just work my way through it based on how I understand it. And I thought that was really cool, and I likened that experience to reading, because like with reading, you first memorize a whole bunch of symbols and phonemes and words or whatever. You start building a vocabulary and associating these random sounds with specific concepts, and then with the grammar you can put those concepts together, and all of a sudden you have language and you're able to create sentences out of thin air just because you understand how all stuff works. And whenever you read something, you take that same understanding, you look at it, you're like, oh, how interesting. Information is now in my head because I looked at a bunch of black dots on a page. Same thing happens here in these puzzle games. What looks like inscrutable nonsense before becomes interesting concept in your head just because of how well you can understand the system, and you can use that understanding to solve these puzzles with ease, depending on how good your model is. So I was like, there's certain puzzle games that do this much better than others. And then I was like, let's see. And then I described what it's like to read the puzzle in Tetris Attack, and I have a section about thinking about puzzle design, blah, 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 blah. I said riddles stink, puzzles rock. Riddles are more about hiding information and not presenting clear rules to the player so that they can figure out how to solve it. Need to get a Professor Layton soundtrack. Push Up keeps running out. And riddles are just about like, you didn't consider this possibility. You're like, of course I didn't. You didn't give me all the rules, right? You didn't let me. You didn't even give me a chance to solve this one because there's so many things that were unsaid, right? And that's kind of the conclusion I left off in this one article. But then I wrote another one. It was like 7 months later. And I was like, hey, check this out. Planet Puzzle League was a big influence on Drop 7. How so? Talk to me about Drop 7. I want to hear this. So while you type, I'll just quickly go over what I meant about puzzle reading in the first place, right? It's the second conclusion I came to, right? I thought it was interesting. We were playing it, a ton of people, a ton of Planet Puzzle League in the office when we made Drop 7. It was a big inspiration. That's really cool. People said so many great things about Drop 7. Noah introduced it to me. He told me to download and play it when I was in New York for the first time. So I played it there. I had it on my phone for a while until I got a new phone years ago. I'll think of a few more questions about Drop 7. One thing I thought was interesting about these types of puzzles that give you these sort of configured challenges in order to solve, right? They're somewhat in between a jigsaw and the systemic puzzles like Braid, but they give you sort of like almost an identical looking challenge every time. They just arrange things differently. One thing I thought was interesting was that you can just read the challenge and you use some of your higher level analysis skills in order to do so, but then something curious happens when you fail to come up with a solution. And the way I described it is, as long as the puzzle is designed a certain way where there's no fail state and potentially no fail state, and then you repeat sequences of the loops in order to find the solution state, and perhaps if it has what I call a logarithmic solvability, where you're manipulating the field in certain ways in order to, like in certain small loops, in order to produce changes. It's kind of hard to describe, but if you have a certain puzzle game that's designed with these things, then you can read the puzzle state that when you fail, you can look at the puzzle as a new puzzle, right? But it's just in an altered state of its original form. And that, looking at your failures in that way can give you unique insights in order to find a solution. And I just thought that was a really interesting sort of technique that you can use when playing some of these puzzle games. Not all of them, but some of them, right? Like Tetris DS's puzzle mode, Fox Life, which is a DSi puzzle game, Hexiom, Indice, these are free indie browser-based puzzle games. Base 10, that is a DSiWare puzzle game. Professor, so any Tower of Hanoi puzzle, those are always, they come up every now and then, but those are really sort of like a classic puzzle. there are some levels in Zen-Gage and Link and Launch that have this property, but I don't really hear a lot of people talking about the techniques in which you solve a puzzle as being part of what makes it unique and entertaining and or well designed, right? People usually talk about puzzles in that it's one hard or two easy, right? And there's no middle grounds for puzzles, which I think are funny. Like, no matter how much people struggle with a puzzle, they use one of those two words to describe their experience playing it. And because puzzles are kind of abstract, and because people generally aren't too aware of their own mental processes, and they certainly don't have a common language, like, or any language to talk about it, that's my best guess is why people struggle to talk about what actually goes on in their head when playing these puzzle games. But hopefully they're still enjoying the varied experiences and the texture that comes from solving these things, right? So you can look at Tetris right here. I love this image. I'm going to try to make it bigger for you guys. So these are all the combinations of, what is it, 4x4 Tetris blocks that are possible within the entire game. And it starts off with just like one piece, like, oh, you got obviously your 2x2s can make a 4x4, and your 4x1s can make a 4x4, but then check this out. You check out these L pieces. These are like radial symmetry, that's cool. And then if you kind of look at every single combination, I think these are, yeah, obviously non-redundant combinations, so you don't just repeat this turned on its side. These are unique combinations. You can kind of, I mean, you can look at something like this and get a lot of insight on what you think about playing Tetris, right? Like, if you were aware, have you even seen these formations, right? Does this look new to you? Like, if so, why? Like, do you always put your Tetris pieces in the same exact, like, quote-unquote best fit? Like, do you even know how aware, or are you even aware of how useful it is to be able to construct these 4x4 shapes? Like, I don't, but this looks particularly neat, particularly interesting, and the further you go down, the more pieces are required to create the shape. And, you know, that's kind of neat. But you can do the same thing with Box Slide. Right here, this image, let's see. So in this game, you cut out squares that are in a grid like this, and then you roll them up into a cube that's a 1x1x1, right? So if you've ever, you know, done any origami in your life, or have ever cut boxes, right? Some of these shapes look very familiar. You can envision in your head, if you roll this up, this would create the outer ring of the box, and you fold these two pieces up, and then, you know, you close the box. Well, each of these shapes is a unique way to fold a 1x1x1 cube. And by playing Box Slide, you learn all of these shapes and all their rotations. And it's just really cool, because once you start playing this game, I have a little example here. Once you start playing this game, they give you some of these, like, just crazy gray shapes right here. And just like with, what is it? Just like, it won't even come up, doesn't matter. Just like with Tangrams, right? That classic puzzle game. Just like with Tangrams, you get a shape like this, and you actually can't see exactly which shapes you need to cut out in order to make, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 perfectly shaped cubes, right? Without any excess and without, you know, making weird shapes like this. So your ability to look at a challenge like this and to see all the different possibilities you can cut out is what the game tests. That's what you're doing playing this puzzle game. But I think the reason why Box Slide is a particularly interesting puzzle game is not that, you know, you can trial and error your way and eventually figure out which shape works best. It's that when you fail like this, by attempting to draw shapes, you can really look carefully at the shape that you missed. And you're like, wait a minute, like, how can I, like, why is this particular shape like this when I messed up? Or if you fail on this example number 2, like, how did I make a solid 2 by 3 and cut all these other shapes properly, but I messed up here. And if you are really sort of intuitively synced up on how to play, if you have a really good model of the game, you're really good at understanding how something can go from a completely unsolved state to a fail state, you can use these fail states to help you figure out how to achieve the win state, knowing that just because the initial conditions of this puzzle are sort of like a small set, and all the conditions and the things you're manipulating are self-contained. So like, here's 2 possibilities down here, the win 1 and 2, that you can do to that you can solve this puzzle. And if in fail 1 more easily, let's see, let me look at this. Yeah, fail 1 more easily lends itself to win solution number 1, and fail 2 easily lends itself to understanding win condition number 2. And I don't think anyone would it's less likely to go from fail 1 to win 2, because if you look at the trouble area, it looks like this area down here is perfectly fine. So you're like, why would I ever want to cut into something that looks like it works? So I'm going to try to manipulate something up here to figure out what I did wrong, and thus this top shape changes. But of course, when the trouble area is down here, you're like, well, I need to change the shape. And the first thing you change is this light blue one, and all of a sudden that pushes this one, which pushes this one, which pushes this one into a different shape. And if you know all your shapes, you can kind of see how one person could come from this to this, fail 1 to win 1, and fail 2 to win 2. And I think that's really interesting. And that kind of, I think games that allow you to do that, and I think games that are designed a certain way can create all these really interesting techniques for people to play better and think better and observe their mistakes differently and come up with solutions differently and observe the process differently to just better understand like the core thing they were messing with in the first place. And it has little to do with just knowing the right solution. Like, certainly you can memorize all these. You can memorize every answer. And there's only a finite amount of puzzles in this game. And even when they shuffle them around, you can just try hard enough and win eventually just by memorizing stuff. But I consider a lot of that to be just scraping the skill floor. Like, why memorize things? It just takes so long to memorize things, and it's still so hard. To me, if you're going to memorize just a few things, why not memorize the rules, right? A few tricks. So being able to solve this puzzle is one thing. Being able to get close when you fail and then use that to reach the win state is another thing. But I think being able to sort of visualize all of it simultaneously is like something distinct. It's a distinct kind of experience that you don't really get a lot in other games that stress other kinds of mental skills and other kinds of skills in general. So it's one of the reasons why I really like puzzle games. It's not that the challenges themselves are necessarily contain all the deep thinking. It's how does the challenge allow you to apply all these different kinds of techniques and skills and experiences and leverage all these different ways to use your brain in order to come up with a solution. So even though the solution may be finite on one end and the starting conditions may be finite, like you got this huge like bubble in the middle where it's just like so when people talk, so every time when people talk about games being hard or easy, I'm like, it's never the point. I don't get it. Puzzle games are generally designed for you to solve them, so coming out of the other end saying it was hard or easy and that you did it, it's just kind of like step one, which is what my old piano teacher, some of the things he used to tell me reminded me a lot of that. When you memorize the rhythms and the notes for a piece of music, you start off at 0% accomplishments, and it's only then when you have everything memorized that you begin to really shape the music and ingest it and make it your own and really understand all the different connecting ideas that you want to when you shape the phrases. Like, that's when you start really doing something. So like skill floor versus skill ceiling. This music is from Professor Layton. It's The Curious Village, which is their first DS game, and they have a lot of accordions in their soundtrack, which I like. Look at all these puzzle games. There's Drop 7. Yeah. I played for 2 hours. By my own count that I kept in my head. Who knows if that's accurate. There's my bad scores. Top 5 Go puzzle games? Is that what you're asking me? Alright, so this is the sheet that I keep of all the games I've ever played. Oops, let's put that back to this. And I keep track of all the times and all the games I beat and all these other stats, but if you go to rank by genre, I also keep track of by genre which games I think are the best according to my own experiences, of course. I have Tetris Attack, Professor Layton series, Tetris DS, Fox Live, Pushmo. Oh, look, The Witness got there. Part number 6. Too bad The Witness. Can you guys even see that? I can't even zoom in on this. Let me see what I can do text-wise. How about that? And then I put Pokemon Picross at 10, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, that's a GBA game, at 9. It's a puzzle platformer, and I think as far as, you know, the whole idea of combining a puzzle game with an action game is tricky and complex and questionable as it is, but I felt like for a puzzle platformer it did a really interesting job fusing the two. And I love Mario, so too bad. Pokemon Picross, which I think is the best version of Picross. Real puzzles, not Tetris. So Tetris DS does have a puzzle mode in it. Tetris DS actually has a lot of unique modes, some of which are actually puzzly and turn-based and of a series. So compared to the default Tetris mode, a lot of people know Tetris DS has a lot more to offer. It's still up there, so too bad. Braid, Portal, Donkey Kong, Pokemon Picross, Aeroporter, which is an action. It's really an action. I hardly put Aeroporter in a puzzle game category, but there's something really unique about that game, which is the reason why everybody hates it, and it's why it's one of my favorite games. Jelly No Puzzle. So I didn't beat Jelly No Puzzle. Where is it? Where is it? What's the Japanese name for Jelly No Puzzle? It's something like that. I really thought that was a great one. I didn't beat it, but it's somewhere, and I need to play that new one that same guy made. Monument Valley, Snakebird. These two indie ones were pretty good. I wish I would have known. Half puzzle, half sort of something else, but I like it. Picross, 3D Logic Base 10 and Pass. Back over here. Monument Valley, you gotta be a hater. Picross 3D. I went back and played it. Oh, come on. Picross 3D is solid, no pun intended. So I recently went back and played some Picross 3D, right? Just really looking at how it coded its number system, right? Like how it created its coding system that you then have to learn the rules for in order to interpret what to do next and how to read. And I was also really seriously considering the nature of 3D in puzzle games and in games in general, and how 3D games actually are. Whether or not they put their interactions in a 3D space, but they ultimately allow you to collapse that 3D space and the dynamics within that space by, like pointing a gun at something. And if you have a hit scan gun that specifically, whenever you point your reticle over something and squeeze the trigger, it essentially turns it into a 2D top-down kind of interaction, where it's just about whether or not it's lined up and not necessarily about the space between you. Of course, lots of different games do it a lot of different ways, but examining how dynamic the 3D is and how it's used, what the feedback systems of the game are. Does the game really want you to sort of internalize and interpret things in a three-dimensional way, or is it just sort of used as a shorthand, just to sort of get people in very close quarters interactions, or to encourage them to do very simple interactions? And that is why that's why I looked at Picross and compared to the 3D version and the 2D version. And there's something weird about the 3D version I'm not exactly sold on. I think they did a great job with the controls, because otherwise that game would flop hard. But there's something about the there's something about the way I was solving it, where because 3D is just so much significantly more complex than 2D, both from a player perspective and a design perspective, right? Like getting the camera to work and all that, and occlusion, and then the player just sort of wrestling with all that and trying to keep the shape of their head. That there's something about taking the very basic act of looking at a number, counting the squares, figuring out which squares you can sort of knock out and which ones you can't. Very basic Picross-like gameplay. There's something about doing that in the 3D version that I felt like it introduced more of the sort of low-level rote actions, the loops, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, than the 2D version did. And I was trying to figure out if that was simply based on my ability to conceptualize the 3D space as like a true 3D. Oh, Steven Totilo talked about it. See, if I type in Picross, right, will I get what I'm looking for? If I type in Tortilla, will I get what I'm looking for? Whose fault is that? Tortilla's fault. Not a lot of people have talked about Picross. Yeah, I doubt it's in here. It's just a darn shame then. So I'm playing the game, and one thing I like about playing puzzle games is trying to not take them seriously until they force me to actually develop some techniques and use some upper level brain power in order to crack them, right? So you try to turn your brain off until they force you to turn your brain on. And one thing I like doing with Picross is like by iterating through the same basic algorithm. I mean, that's what. Are you saying that significantly? So you're saying you can solve every Picross 3D puzzle by iterating through the same basic algorithm. Are you saying that's significantly different than Picross 2D and or Sudoku? I'll give you time to answer. I'm gonna pop this chat out. Let's see if I can put the chat in the stream. I cannot put the chat in the stream. Chat. There we go. Yeah. So that's the very thing I was looking into, right? I was playing Picross 2D back and forth with 3D a few months ago, and I was just going back and forth. I would develop a technique for 2D and try to apply that technique to 3D. And then I was also doing exercises on visualization where I would draw pictures. I was trying to draw pictures and then draw pictures with my left and right hand because I'm right-handed. I can show you some of the pictures, maybe. It's hilarious. I'll find them. But I was drawing pictures with my left and right hand and just observing how my brain would try to tackle the same known, thing I wanted to draw, but then like how my body would screw it up. And just doing a lot of work visualizing, trying to see things ahead of time, and just like observing how that affected me in my mind. Where's my drawings? All posts. Okay, so check this out. So I'm drawing Pokemon on Pokemon Art Academy because it's a gift, and I like drawing Pokemon. And let's see, where is it? I don't have any of the ones I drew in my left hand on here. I'll have to find that picture later. Then I would draw the Pokemon with my left hand and my right hand, and then I would observe what was happening in the meantime inside my brain. Sorry, didn't have. Oh my gosh, I have to find that picture now. It's not hard for me to find, but I'll keep talking. I'll type in left hand. So then I'm like, okay, going back and forth between 2D and 3D Picross. I'm like, is the 3D? Is it really that complicated? Like 3D in general, I wrote this article series a long time ago, right? I'll type in Richard here, and I'll type in 2D plus. Let's think. Okay, so I wrote this article series called 2D plus 2D equals 3D, right? And just really getting just really making an inventory about how different games use the three-dimensional space differently, what that means for the gameplay, like what that means for the design of controls and all this stuff. And essentially, one way to think about 3D design is that it's really just 2D plus 2D, right? And like, yeah, it's the third dimension, but in a lot of ways that we play games, a lot of ways that we conceptualize things, it's really two-dimensionally. And what we do is like to shift back and forth between how we think about things two-dimensionally to handle three-dimensional problems. Like lining things up in Mario behind our back so we can eliminate the stress of triangulating and so on and so forth. Like so many different examples if you look at various player behavior. And just kind of running with that idea, I was wondering for the Pokemon Picross 3D, like what is it really bringing to the table? Like it's cool that you're carving out a shape, and it's cool that you have to spin the camera. And in Picross 2D, I would quickly scan the outside of the board and scan everything that I've done in the puzzle to figure out where I need to go next. So I can quickly see like, oh, top left of the puzzle has all these tick marks, right? Where are they? Yeah, like top left, I know what to look at top right. I scan all the numbers on the left and right here at the beginning, and I know, okay, I know where the trouble areas are going to be, which areas I'm most likely going to solve last, because they don't seem to have enough information to solve on their own, especially when I cross-compare them to the numbers up here. And you just get like this really good sense of how to move across the board, and at a glance, you're always within focus of your singular primary way of visualizing your goal, which is the shape that you're drawing. In 3D, not only is it in 3 dimensions, which is hard enough to deal with, like it's an extra dimension, but I think the very nature of visualizing something that's static and in front of you, like a 2D game view versus a 3D, where every time you move the camera, not only are you occluding what you've done before, but it kind of scrambles your brain. So I'm like, if I can visualize so well this 2D one, even if it's a large puzzle like this, and then I go over to the 3D one, and I have that much harder of a time visualizing and looking ahead and knowing which areas intuitively or like naturally that I need to solve before I get it, then like, why is it so much harder? That's what I kept asking myself. Is it possible for me to play Miagakure? Because that game's not out yet, and I'm not part of Jonathan Blow or Mark Ten Bosch's coterie of cool people, so I don't really get access to stuff like that. And nobody tweets at me free codes for anything. Just kidding. Where's the thing I'm looking for? Yeah, I mean, nobody cares about me or. Alright, thanks for joining. Talk to you later. So I'll finish what I was talking about with 2D and 3D Picross. One, I'm not so sure, or I'm not sure how the simple inclusion of three-dimensional space. Dude, where is it? Yeah, I'm not sure how much the 3D actually changes things, right? It's kind of hard to say. Let me click on this one. Why can't I drag this one? There we go. And dude, systems and rules, baby. And I'm going to drag this one down. Dude, where is it? Yeah, I'm not sure how much the 3D actually changes things, right? It's kind of hard to say. Let me click on this one. Why can't I drag this one? There we go. And that's sort of a conundrum for me right now. But and doesn't that seem like the right answer anyway? Picross 3D adds one more dimension, but uses the same basic coding system to determine which blocks to knock out and which ones not to knock out. So doesn't that stand to reason that because there is an exponentially more space, because it's another dimension worth of space, is volume. That's why we cube things to create volume. That there's more rote checking, right? You're like, okay, just do the simple thing, look for the number, check, spin the thing, look for the number, check, spin the thing, look for the number, check. Like, doesn't that make sense? But then here's the other sort of consideration. Picross 2D, we'll look at the screenshot again. Oh, let's look at Sudoku, who cares? Let me draw on this, because I like drawing on things. Can I pull this off? My Twitch setup. Whiteboard activated. There we go. Oh, you see that nice shape? Okay, I'm going to clear it. I don't know my... What the? How do I clear the whiteboard? I don't know my shortcuts. Here we go. Escape to clear the whiteboard. Okay. Shift to do the tools. Okay. Okay, so like when you're playing Sudoku, you're like, okay, I'm trying to fill out these numbers in black, I'm assuming. And let's say these numbers are here. So when you're looking for this number, you have this axis to check, this axis to check, and then this square to check in order to help you figure out what goes into this individual cell right here. So that's essentially a 3-axis system in order for there to be clues or deductive clues in order to figure out what's in there. Don't you think that would be the same in Picross 3D? That you have the potential for more clues to exist because you have the x-axis the y-axis and the z-axis to check for a number clue in order to figure out if something's there. And you're like, yeah, that should be the case, and that should cut down on a lot of the Kirby, you're making me fuzzy. It should cut down on a lot of the sort of rote guessing and checking, but I think what it does is, instead of being all visually apparent from one 2D perspective, instead of being able to use peripheral vision to glance up and down and then focus on this area in order to determine what number is there, you have to, I don't know, you have to essentially build the 3D model in your head and then still build the numbers and squares in your head too. So like right here, when you look vertically, you're not necessarily counting the number of squares. You may, but you can also check which numbers they are. So you read, you actually use these symbols to tell you something about what symbols can be here. And even though the numbers in Sudoku aren't important, the fact that they are unique symbols and familiar symbols kind of helps. In Picross 3D, you have to actually build the shape without fail. Like all the three-dimensional blips and bloops and how they hang out in space, sometimes even unattached to other pieces, sometimes with numbers that are only on one side and not the other two sides, makes it much more difficult to read, I think, which makes it more prone to just looking at each thing individually, double checking. And unlike Sudoku, where your ability to input numbers flows across the screen because it's one screen view, and like I said before, you can kind of see everything at a glance. Picross 3D just can't do that. So if you're asking me what 3D added to Picross 3D, a neat way to challenge yourself to visualize 3D shapes, but ultimately not a neat way to solve the puzzle deductively. Thanks, Bleach. Oops, gotta get rid of my whiteboard. There we go. Okay, so, we don't want the stream to run too late. So what we'll end on is this idea that there are many different kinds of puzzle games. They stress your knowledge skills differently, whether or not they have one solution or two doesn't really matter. We are really concerned about the nature of the challenge, which includes the developer intended / main way to solve the challenge, and additional ways for players to use their analyze knowledge skills to approach finding the solution. We cannot determine if there's like a better way to develop games of one way or another, because I haven't made any puzzle games and we don't really care. And as we approach looking at The Witness later on in the week, we can at least examine the puzzle using these various lenses, right? Like how complex the puzzle itself is, right? What kind of coding system it uses, which I'll give you a hint. It uses shapes and it uses colors and various other things actually. So, what kind of coding system it uses, and then we can look at all kinds of things like how it stacks its ideas, how it creates a progression of challenges, what ideas are communicated there, what are the brute force way of solving the challenges, and then what are the many elegant ways and alternate ways you can solve the challenge that does not include taking a screenshot and then photoshopping it and then looking at your computer or looking at the answer. You can do all the puzzles in your head, and we can discuss what that means and which puzzles seem to be the hardest to do so. So there's a lot of things I'm going to look forward to talking about in the Witness, and I think we are ready to do so. So check us out tomorrow at 3 p.m. Central Time. We will be listening to more people talk about The Witness in particular instead of just puzzle game design like we did today. about an hour, 2 hours of just solid reporting there at 3. And then later at 9 again, we will discuss specific things from the witness. We have many beautiful screenshots to look at to help us figure out what's going on. Don't look if you've never played. Obviously, there's going to be spoilers. Guard your eyes, right? So, my name has been Kirby Kid. Go Richard Terrell. You can find me on Twitter, but follow Design Oriented. We're going to be doing a lot more of this stuff. I didn't even change the level design color, so this whole thing has been about level design, which level design between that or design itself. But you can see the colors down at the bottom. A lot of interesting things to discuss. A lot of games we will continue to use in our comparison with the witness as we go along. A lot of different things to read and say. So tune in next time, and we'll see you tomorrow.